You're writing your React code, you use useState all day, every day. But what if I told you a tiny misunderstanding about how it really works could be the secret culprit behind some or many of those annoying bugs? You know what I mean. The counter that won't update, or the list that won't re-render when you push new items to it. Chances are you've fallen for one of the common useState myths. Today, we're digging into these, starting with the biggest one of all. The idea that useState is asynchronous. Okay, the number one misconception, the one that gets everybody, is that useState is asynchronous. We have all written this code. You have a count variable, and you have a button to update that count. When you update the count, you set the count to count plus 1. And then you immediately log the count variable, expecting to see the new value. Nope, it just logs the old one. So what's going on here? It's not async like a promise that you can await. The truth is, React is smart, and it batches state updates for performance reasons. When you call a setter in an event handler, React doesn't just re-render on the spot. Instead, it more like collects your state changes and applies them in one go to avoid pointless re-renders. The count variable inside our function isn't live here. It's a snapshot of the state from the moment the render happened. And that is why calling setCount, count plus 1, even if you do this twice, it will only increment your count one time. Because both of these setters are looking at the exact same count number, in this case 0. So what's the fix? The functional update. Instead of telling React where the new state is, we pass it a function so it can calculate it. And that looks like this. We're saying to grab the previous value and increment it by 1. This function gets the latest state handed to it as an argument, guaranteeing you're working with the freshest data. So if we were to do this, where we call this function twice, this would actually increase our state variable twice, as we would expect. If that little light bulb just went on, do me a favor, hit the like button. It's a huge help, and trust me, we've got 2 more game-changing myths to dig into. All right, the next myth is a silent killer of components. The idea that you can just change objects and arrays directly in state. Let's say you've got a user profile object in state that looks like this. And you have a helper function to update the user. User.age equals 31, set user to user. You might even go as far as logging out your user object, and you can see that the age is indeed updated to 31. But your component just sits there. No re-render, but why? Well, the reason is simple. React isn't deep diving into your objects to see what changed. It's doing a quick check. Is the same object in memory as it was before? When you mutate the state directly, that reference to that object doesn't change. So React just shrugs and says, looks the same to me, and it skips the re-render. The same thing happens when you try to push to an array. The fix is to embrace immutability. You never change state directly. You always create a new copy. The spread syntax is your friend here. So for that user profile, instead of writing this, we would write this. Set user to a copy of the user object and update the age property. This builds a brand new object, copies over your old stuff, and applies your change. React then will see this new object, a new reference, and boom, triggers the re-render that you were expecting. This last one is a bit more subtle, but it can be a real performance hog. It's a myth about how useState handles its initial value. Imagine instead of hard coding our user profile here, we were using a function to retrieve it. This could be some kind of complex, expensive function like crunching data or hitting local storage. You might write something like this. But here's the catch. This function doesn't run just once. It runs on every single render of your component. React only uses its return value the first time, but the code is still pointlessly running this heavy calculation over and over again. The solution is actually something super simple called lazy loading. Instead of passing the result of the function, we pass the function itself, but inside of an arrow function. So something like this. Now you're telling React, hey, only run this function one time on the very first render to get my starting value. It is a tiny change, but it stops your component from dragging its feet on every update. That's it for today. We busted 3 huge useState myths. State updates aren't asynchronous, they're batched. And if your state depends on old state, always use the functional update. Don't mutate state, ever. Always, always create a new object or array with the spread syntax to guarantee React sees the change. Expensive initial state needs to be lazy. Wrap your initial calculation in a function to make sure that it only runs one time. Nailing these concepts will save you so much debugging time, and it'll make your React code way more solid and performant. Thanks for hanging out today. If this helped you out, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into React. I'll see you in the next one.